My parents chose my brother's birthday over the funeral of my wife and 2 children. When I told them the tragic news, my father calmly said, "Today is your brother's birthday. We can't come." 6 months later, one headline about me sent my whole family into a panic when they learned I had. Can you imagine losing everything, your future, your family, your very identity, only to find yourself staring down the barrel of the person who took it all, ready to fight back harder than you ever thought possible? Because that's my story, a gut-wrenching tale of betrayal, love, and a reckoning that was years in the making. Hey everyone, my name is Alexander Whitmore, but please, just call me Alex. I'm 39, and if you asked me what I do for a living, I'd probably just give you a wry, exhausted smile and say, I'm trying to navigate the hurricane my own family stirred up. This isn't some Hollywood script with a happy ending, or a neat little fairy tale. This is my life. It's a messy, tangled knot of love, betrayal, and wounds that, honestly, still haven't healed. So, pull up a chair, because I'm about to drag you into my world, a world where supermarkets aren't just places to grab groceries. No, they're battlegrounds. Places where families fight, ambitions clash, and hearts get absolutely shattered. I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a mansion so lavish that even the air around it smelled of old money. The Whitmore family, my family, we were practically the poster children for wealth and power. My father, Charles Whitmore, he was the chairman and CEO of Whitmore Retail Group, this sprawling, high-end supermarket empire that stretched right across America. You know, if you've ever stepped into a Whitmore store, you'd see it, shelves gleaming under soft, almost reverent lighting, stocked with Bordeaux wine, artisanal cheese from Provence, organic strawberries flown in from the other side of the world. Everything was, well, perfect. From the way the light caressed those jam jars to the meticulously practiced smiles of the staff. That was my father's world. A world where nothing was allowed to be less than exquisite. And I was the eldest son, the chosen one, destined to inherit this whole damn empire. From a ridiculously young age, they drilled it into me, the Whitmore name wasn't just some label. It was a legacy. My father, he'd sit at the head of our impossibly opulent dining table, surrounded by oil paintings, and he'd recount these almost mythical tales of how my grandfather built the company from a single store in Manhattan. Alex, he'd say, his voice low and sharp like a freshly honed blade. You are the future of Whitmore retail. Don't let me down. I'd just nod, you know? But deep down, I was this 10-year-old kid wondering why I had to carry the entire weight of my family's history on my shoulders. Our house wasn't just a family home. It was more like a dynasty in the making. My mother, Monica, always dressed in silk, always with her pearls, but her eyes, they always seemed so distant, like she was trapped in a life she never truly wanted. Then there was my younger brother, Nathaniel, for years my junior. He was a carbon copy of my father, always knowing exactly how to please him, always flashing that perfect, calculated smile at just the right moment. And me? I was the one who asked too many questions. The one who felt like I was suffocating at those endless dinner parties where guests only ever talked about stocks, real estate, and their latest European vacations. But my life, it truly changed when I met Elena. She was this incredible light in my otherwise dark, stifling world. And looking back, she was also the spark that ignited every single tragedy that followed. I met Elena Lancaster during my sophomore year at Stanford. It was one of those perfect, crisp autumn afternoons, golden leaves just dancing across the campus paths. I was buried in an economics textbook in the library, practically invisible, when she walked in. She brought with her this fresh breeze, you know? And the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Elena she was just different. Not like any girl I'd ever met. Simple sweater, hair tied up in a high ponytail, and these deep brown eyes that sparkled like they held 1,000 untold stories. She sat down at the table opposite me, set down a stack of books, and accidentally dropped her pen. I picked it up, handed it back, and when our hands touched, I swear, a jolt of pure electricity shot right through me. Thank you, she said, flashing a smile that made me completely forget where I was. I'm Elena Lancaster. Alex Whitmore. I managed to reply, trying desperately to keep my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding like a drum against my ribs. We started talking, and it didn't take long for me to realize Elena wasn't the type to show off, to play games. She was incredibly intelligent, sharp as a tack, but had this raw sincerity that made me feel like I could finally shed the armor I'd worn for years. She talked about her family, about her father, Robert Lancaster, the founder of Lancaster Market, a chain of budget supermarkets, serving working-class folks in low-income communities. My dad always says. Elena laughed, a genuine, warm sound. Everyone deserves to eat well, not just the wealthy. I chuckled along, but honestly, a twinge of real unease stirred within me. Lancaster Market. That name wasn't new to me. It was, effectively, the sworn enemy of Whitmore Retail Group. The Lancasters and the Whitmores were like two sides of the same coin, coexisting in the retail industry, but as different as night and day. See, Whitmore Retail, we prided ourselves on being the brand of the elite. Our customers would happily pay hundreds of dollars for a bottle of Italian olive oil, just because it came in a handcrafted glass bottle. My father, he often referred to Lancaster Market as those cheap supermarkets, with this absolute tone of disdain. They sell to people who don't know quality. He'd scoff during a shareholders meeting when I was just 16 and allowed to sit in. They tarnished the retail industry. But Lancaster Market, they saw things completely differently. Robert Lancaster, Elena's father, he built his company from a tiny store in Portland, Oregon, with this incredibly simple, powerful mission: bring quality food to every American household, regardless of income. Their marketing campaigns, they were targeted at workers, at single mothers, at struggling neighborhoods. They even ran this free meals program on weekends for kids in underserved areas. My father? He called it cheap PR stunts to win the masses. But me? I never dared say it aloud, but I thought it was something Whitmore Retail could never, ever achieve, making a real difference in the community. The rivalry between our two families, it wasn't just talk. No, it was a full-blown war. Whitmore Retail and Lancaster Market had sued each other over some advertising campaign my father claimed the Lancasters had stolen. They fought tooth and nail over prime real estate in major cities like Chicago, Dallas, Miami. I even remember one industry conference where my father and Robert Lancaster nearly came to blows over a comment about the true value of food. My brother Nathaniel, he jokingly called it the war of the vegetable vendors. But for me it felt like a tragic comedy, you know? Both sides so consumed by their own egos that they couldn't see the harm they were inflicting on their loved ones. But Elena and I, we fell in love despite all those stupid barriers. Our date nights? They weren't at fancy restaurants or luxury resorts. We preferred sitting in a small diner in Palo Alto, eating greasy burgers and just laughing about our economics exams. Elena, she always carried this little notebook where she'd jot down ideas for improving food supply chains. If we could deliver fresh produce within 24 hours at a low cost, she'd say, her eyes absolutely shining, people wouldn't have to choose between quality and their budget. I loved her passion. I loved the way she saw the world, not through the cold, calculating lens of wealth, but through simple, powerful values. But even then, I knew our love was a ticking time bomb. My father would never accept Elena. Not just because she was Robert Lancaster's daughter, but because she represented everything he despised. And then, the storm hit. It was one winter evening. I brought Elena home to meet my family. I braced myself, sure, but I never in a million years expected it to go as badly as it did. The Whitmore mansion was ablaze with lights, the dining table set like some royal banquet. My mother, she gave a stiff, forced smile. Nathaniel sat there, arms crossed, a smug scowl already forming. And my father? He looked at Elena as if she were an actual intruder, something dirty that had dared to step into his pristine world. Mom, Dad, this is Elena Lancaster, I introduced, trying to keep my voice calm, steady, despite the tremor in my hands. She's studying with me at Stanford. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence so thick I could literally hear the loud ticking of the wall clock. Then my father spoke, his voice cold as ice, cutting right through the quiet. Lancaster. Robert Lancaster's daughter. The one running the retail industry. Elena gripped my hand under the table, her fingers intertwining with mine, but she didn't back down. Not an inch. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice clear and unbelievably steady. My father built Lancaster Market to help people, not to ruin anyone. My father let out this mocking laugh, a sound that sent a real chill down my spine. Help people? You think selling cheap goods to the poor is helping them? You're tarnishing this family's name, Alex, and you're deeply disappointing me. That evening, it ended in a horrific argument, a shouting match that tore through the perfect facade of our home. My father stood up, pointed a finger at me, and bellowed. If you choose this girl, you're no longer my son. Nathaniel, he just sat there silently, but I saw the corner of his mouth curl, a sickening, smug smirk as if he were enjoying every single second of the drama. My mother just bowed her head, her hands clutching her napkin so tightly her knuckles were white. I walked Elena to her car, mumbling apologies for everything. But she just shook her head, hugged me tight, and whispered, "Alex, I don't need your family to accept me. I just need you." The weeks that followed were even worse, if you can believe it. My father summoned me to his office at Whitmore Retail's headquarters in Manhattan. The room was vast, with windows overlooking the breathtaking New York skyline, but the atmosphere inside felt like a goddamn prison. He sat behind his enormous desk, his eyes cold and piercing, like he was looking right through me. "I've made my decision," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Nathaniel will inherit the company. You're no longer in the plan." I stood there, feeling like the floor had just collapsed beneath me. "Because of Elena?" I managed, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper. "Because you've betrayed this family," he replied, cutting me off. "You chose the daughter of our enemy, a girl unworthy of the Whitmore name. From now on, you're on your own." I left that office, my mind absolutely reeling. I'd lost my place in the company, my father's approval, maybe my entire family. But when I called Elena and heard her warm, comforting voice over the phone, I knew, deep down, I'd made the right choice. She was my home. The place where I truly belong. In the meantime, I found myself visiting the Lancaster family in Portland, Oregon. Their home was in the suburbs, a modest, wooden house with a small, vibrant garden bursting with vegetables. Robert Lancaster, Elena's father, he welcomed me like an old, cherished friend. He wore a worn-out shirt, his hands calloused from years of honest work in his stores. "Alex," he said, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You love my daughter, and that's enough. I don't care if you're Charles Whitmore's son or anyone else. Your family." I looked at him, then at Elena standing beside him, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly, unconditionally accepted. But deep down, I knew it. The war between the Whitmores and the Lancasters wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. And I was standing right on the dividing line. My story, it was really just beginning. Because this isn't just a story about supermarkets, or money, or power. It's a story about hearts, about excruciating choices, and the devastating price you pay when you dare to live true to yourself. I stood in front of the mirror in our small Seattle apartment, trying to tie my tie, my hands still trembling slightly with memories. It had been 3 years since that fateful evening when my father disowned me. 3 years since Nathaniel became the heir to Whitmore Retail Group. 3 years since I chose Elena over the cold, hard legacy of my family. 3 years, and yet every time I looked in the mirror, I could still see my father's eyes, cold and piercing, as if he were still judging me from afar. You know, I didn't join Lancaster Market, even though Robert Lancaster, Elena's father, offered me a position multiple times. "You have talent, Alex. You could help us bring good food to more people," he'd say during one of my visits to their home in Portland. But I declined. I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet. I didn't want to be known as the son-in-law propped up by his wife's family. Or maybe, deep down, I refused because I still felt a pang of guilt. Joining Lancaster Market would feel like a betrayal to my own father, and I wasn't ready for that. Not then anyway. So, I chose a different path. I joined Fresh Route, a tiny logistics startup in Seattle, all focused on fresh food supply chains. My job was to figure out how to get vegetables, fruits, and fresh meat from farms to consumers within 24 hours, at the absolute lowest cost possible. It was grueling work, let me tell you. Long days in a stuffy office, late nights crunching data. But I loved it. I loved the feeling of creating something meaningful, of working with people who didn't care whose son I was, only what I could do. Elena and we got married on a beautiful spring afternoon, about 3 years after we graduated. The wedding was in a small, charming church on the outskirts of Portland. No lavish reception, no guests in Armani suits or glittering ball gowns. Just the Lancaster family, a few close friends from Stanford, and a priest with the kindest smile. Robert walked Elena down the aisle, his eyes shining with pride, and maybe a touch of sadness. "You're my son now, Alex," he whispered, hugging me tight after the ceremony. "Take care of her." No one from the Whitmore family showed up. I had sent an invitation, of course, even though I knew in my heart they wouldn't come. My mother sent a brief text, Wishing you happiness, Alex. I'm sorry. My father? Nothing. Nathaniel, though, he posted a photo on social media, raising a glass of wine at some party in the Hamptons with the caption, "Congrats to my brother on his big day choosing love over family." I read it, felt a sharp stab in my chest, but I didn't respond. I'd learned that sometimes silence is the strongest reply. Seattle, where Elena and I settled, it's this beautiful city with a mild climate, surrounded by lush nature. Our apartment was on the 5th floor of a modern building, with windows overlooking Puget Sound. It wasn't as grand as the Greenwich Mansion, not by a long shot, but it was ours. I still remember the day we moved in. Elena, standing amidst a pile of cardboard boxes, hands on her hips, just laughing. "Alex," she said, "we have a kitchen table. A real kitchen table." I laughed, pulled her into my arms, and we just stood there, surrounded by chaos, happier than we'd ever been. 2 years later, Olivia was born. She was a miniature version of Elena, big brown eyes, a radiant smile, and a stubborn streak that both charmed and exasperated me. When Olivia was 3, Marcus arrived, a quiet little boy with eyes just like mine. Watching our 2 children play on the living room floor, I felt like I'd found the true meaning of life. It wasn't the gleaming shelves of Whitmore Retail, or the revenue numbers, or the multi-million-dollar deals. It was these moments. Olivia's infectious laughter as I pushed her on a swing. Marcus babbling, "Papa," as I lifted him into my arms. Elena was the soul of our family. She worked part-time for a nonprofit, helping underserved communities access fresh food. In the evenings, she'd sit at the kitchen table, writing or discussing new ideas for fresh food with me. "If we could cut transportation costs by another 10%, she'd say, her eyes sparkling with passion, "we could get fresh carrots to even the poorest neighborhoods." I loved how she always thought of others. How she turned the simplest things into something extraordinary. But not everything was perfect. Despite my best efforts to cut ties with the Whitmores, their shadow, it still loomed over my life. My mother called occasionally, her voice laced with guilt, but never daring to go too far. "Alex, are you doing okay? How are the kids?" she'd ask, and I'd answer briefly, knowing she'd never, ever stand up to my father. Nathaniel was different. He seemed to relish reminding me I'd been cast out of the family. Once he sent me an article about Whitmore Retail with a message, "Look at what you're missing. We just opened 5 new stores in California. Too bad for you." I didn't reply, but his words still cut deep. Not because I regretted leaving my father's empire, but because a small, foolish part of me still hoped my family would change. I wrote letters to my mother, sending photos of Olivia and Marcus, sharing stories about our simple life in Seattle. But those letters rarely got a response. Once, my mother sent a birthday card for Olivia with a $10,000 check. I returned it with a short, polite note. "Thank you, Mom. But we don't need the money. We're happy." Life at Fresh Root wasn't always easy. Our startup was tiny, competing with absolute giants in the logistics industry. Some weeks, I worked 80 hours, dozing off at my desk, coming home with dark circles under my eyes. But Elena was always there, with a hot cup of coffee and that incredible smile. "You're doing something amazing, Alex," she'd say. "Every Fresh Root truck means a family is eating fresh produce. Don't give up." And I didn't. We developed a real-time tracking system that cut delivery times from 48 hours to a mind-blowing 24. Small farms began to trust us, and Fresh Root's revenue grew steadily. I wasn't making millions like my father, but I was proud that my work had meaning. I was building something not to get rich, but to make life better for others. One Sunday afternoon, Elena and I took Olivia and Marcus for a picnic at a park near our home. Olivia, 5 now, ran around on the grass, chasing a butterfly. Marcus sat on my shoulders, giggling as I pretended to be a horse. Elena lay on the picnic blanket, reading a book, but every so often she'd look up at us with a gentle, loving smile. "You know," she said, "sometimes I think we found paradise." I sat down beside her, pulling her into my arms. "My paradise is you," I said, and she laughed playfully, punching my shoulder. "So cheesy, Whitmore." It was a perfect moment. One of those you want to frame and keep forever. But I didn't know that just a few hours later, everything would shatter like a bursting bubble. That was the last picnic where I could still hold Elena's hand, where I could watch Olivia and Marcus run across the grass. We left the park as the sun began to set, its golden glow stretching across the lake. Olivia dozed off in the back seat, clutching her butterfly kite tightly. Marcus was half asleep, his head resting on his sister's shoulder. Elena sat beside me, softly humming a lullaby her mother used to sing. I drove, my heart feeling like everything in the world was perfectly, wonderfully right. The road back to Seattle was a 2-lane highway, winding through fields and forests. I kept a steady speed, the radio playing soothing jazz. Elena reached over, her fingers intertwining tightly with mine. Today was fun, wasn't it? She said, her voice soft. We should do this more often. I nodded, smiling. More often. Maybe next week we. My words were cut off by a blinding light ahead. A massive container truck, like a monstrous beast, veered across the center line, heading straight for us. I only heard Elena scream, "Alex, be careful," before everything plunged into darkness. I woke up in a stark white room, the sharp, sterile smell of antiseptic filling the air. My head throbbed, my left arm was numb, and a strange, cold emptiness gripped my chest. A nurse stood by my bed, checking a chart. "You're awake," she said, her voice gentle, but cautious. "You have a broken arm and some minor injuries. You're very lucky." Lucky? The word rang like a cruel, twisted joke. I tried to sit up, but a wave of searing pain made me groan. My wife? My kids? Where are they? I asked, my voice hoarse, as if my throat were filled with sand. The nurse looked at me, her eyes darting away. "I'll get the doctor," she said, hurrying out. A chill, an icy dread, ran down my spine. I knew something was terribly wrong, but I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. The doctor entered, a middle-aged man with eyes full of compassion. He sat beside my bed, his voice low, measured. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm so sorry. The accident, it was severe. Your wife and 2 children, they didn't make it." The world around me collapsed. I heard his words, but they weren't real. They couldn't be. Elena, the girl with a smile brighter than the sun, couldn't be gone. Olivia, my little girl with the curly hair and a laugh that echoed pure joy, couldn't have vanished. Marcus, my tiny son, who called Papa every time I walked into the room, couldn't be gone. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, you're wrong. They're fine. They have to be." The doctor placed a hand on my shoulder, but I shoved it away. "Take me to them," I shouted, trying to stand despite the searing pain in my broken arm. "Where are they? Elena! Olivia! Marcus!" The nurse and doctor had to restrain me, injecting a sedative to keep me from hurting myself. I collapsed back onto the bed, tears streaming down my face, but no sound escaped my lips. Only a vast, cold void swallowed everything I had ever loved. The days that followed passed like a nightmare, a horrifying blur. I lay in that hospital, staring at the ceiling, trying desperately to piece together what had happened. The truck driver had fallen asleep, the police told me. He lost control, crashing head-on into our car. He survived, with only a few scratches. But my family, they didn't stand a chance. I didn't know what to feel about the driver. Anger, hatred, or just this crushing emptiness. I no longer had the strength to feel anything. Elena's parents, Robert and Margaret, they flew from Portland as soon as they heard. They sat by my bedside, silently holding my hand. Margaret, Elena's mother, she just wept, her frail shoulders trembling. "Alex, you're our son," she said, her voice choked with sobs. "We lost Elena and the kids, but we won't lose you." Robert didn't say much, but his eyes, they were filled with unimaginable pain. He sat there, looking a decade older, as if the accident had taken not only his daughter and grandchildren, but a piece of his very soul. "What do you need, Alex?" he asked. "Anything? Just tell me." I didn't answer. I didn't know what I needed, except to turn back time, to hold Elena again, to hear Olivia's laugh and Marcus's voice. But time never grants such wishes. The Whitmores. My own family. They were a different story entirely. I called my mother, leaving a trembling voicemail about the accident. I hoped, even just a little, that they'd come. That they'd set aside their pride, their ridiculous feud, to be with me in this moment of utter devastation. But no one came. My mother called back, her voice heavy with guilt. "Alex, I wanted to come, but your father, he wouldn't allow it. He said I shouldn't interfere with the life you chose." I gripped the phone, feeling my chest constrict so tightly it hurt to breathe. "Mom, my wife and your 2 grandchildren are dead," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Do you understand? They're dead. My mother sobbed over the phone, but she didn't come. My father? He said nothing. Later, I learned a painful truth. My father was busy hosting a birthday party for Nathaniel at the Greenwich mansion, complete with expensive wine and high-profile guests. The funeral for my wife and 2 children was held at a small church in Portland, where Elena grew up. I stood before 3 coffins, 2 so tiny they absolutely shattered my heart. Olivia, she still held her butterfly kite in her eternal sleep. Marcus, with his peaceful face, looked like he was just having a sweet dream. And Elena, she looked like she was merely asleep, her brown hair gently framing her face, her lips closed as if she had something left to say to me. I sent a funeral notice to the Whitmores, despite Robert's advice against it. They don't deserve it, Alex, he'd said, his voice thick with anger. But I sent it anyway, foolishly hoping they'd come, that my father would see those 3 graves and realize he was wrong. But no one came. Not a formal condolence, not a single message. I stood before the graves, clutching the crumpled eulogy as tightly as my broken heart. Robert stood beside me, his hand a heavy, comforting weight on my shoulder. You're my son, he said, his voice firm despite his red-rimmed eyes. You lost your wife, your children, but you haven't lost your family. We're here, Alex. We'll always be here. I nodded, but inside I knew I'd lost everything. Elena was my light. Olivia and Marcus were why I woke up each morning. Now I was left with only a void, and I didn't know how to fill it. The weeks after the funeral, I lived like a shadow. I returned to our Seattle apartment, where everything reminded me of them. Olivia's pink dress hung in the closet. Marcus's tiny shoes sat in the corner. And Elena's notebook, filled with her incredible ideas about fresh food, lay open on the kitchen table. I couldn't touch them, but I couldn't throw them away either. Each night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying desperately to recall Elena's voice, Olivia's laugh, or the way Marcus gripped my finger. But the harder I tried, the more they slipped away, like sand through my fingers. Robert and Margaret visited often, bringing food, bringing stories of Elena as a child. They tried to pull me from the abyss, but I knew they were hurting too. We were survivors, left to face a world that no longer felt the same. One evening, as I sat alone in the dark apartment, the doorbell rang. I opened it, expecting Robert, but it was my mother. She stood there in a long coat, her eyes red, swollen. Alex, she said, her voice trembling. I'm sorry I couldn't come to the funeral. Your father, don't talk about him. I cut her off, my voice cold, devoid of emotion. Why are you here? She stepped inside, wrapping her arms around me, and I felt her trembling against me. I wanted to see you, she whispered. I wanted to know if you're okay. I didn't answer. I wasn't okay, and she knew it. But I let her stay, because she was still my mother. We sat in silence, and for the first time, I truly realized she, too, was a victim of my father, trapped in the gilded cage of the Whitmore family. But her presence, it couldn't ease my pain. It only reminded me that my family, the ones who should have been there, had chosen to stay out of my life. 6 months after the accident, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like a shadow, couldn't let grief consume me completely. I stood before the mirror, staring into my own hollow eyes, and told myself, you have to do something, Alex. For Elena. For Olivia. For Marcus. I wrote a final letter to my father, my mother, and Nathaniel. It was brief, just a few devastating lines. I'm no longer part of the Whitmore family. Don't contact me again. I sent it, then turned off my phone, cutting the last thread. I sold all the shares my grandfather had left me in Whitmore Retail Group. A substantial sum, sure, but I didn't need it. Money couldn't buy back what I'd lost. What I needed was a cold, decisive plan for revenge. No mercy. Then I called Robert Lancaster. Dad, I said, calling him that for the very first time. My voice cracked, but the resolve was there. I want to join Lancaster Market. I want to carry on what Elena dreamed of. Robert was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. Welcome home, son. I moved to Portland a week later. Robert and Margaret welcomed me like a son returning from a war. Their wooden house was the same as ever, with its small garden full of vegetables and the faint, comforting smell of freshly baked bread in the air. Margaret hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. We'll get through this together, Alex, she said. For Elena. For the kids? I nodded. But inside I knew I hadn't come here just to heal. I came to fight. Not only for Elena, but for myself. The Whitmores had abandoned me, and now I would abandon them. Joining Lancaster Market sent shockwaves through the media, believe me. Business headlines blared. Disowned son of Charles Whitmore joins direct competitor. Some called me a traitor, others a maverick, breaking tradition. I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for fame, or to prove anything to the world. I was doing it for Elena. For Olivia. For Marcus. And to find meaning in a life that had been utterly shattered. Robert brought me into the leadership team as Director of Strategic Development. Lancaster Market's office was in a modest building in Portland, completely devoid of the oil paintings or the glittering New York skyline views of Whitmore Retail's headquarters. But here I felt a warmth and sincerity I'd never experienced in Greenwich. Employees called Robert Uncle Rob, and they worked not just for money, but for a shared belief in the company's mission, to bring good food to every American family. On my first day at Lancaster Market, I sat in a meeting room with Robert and the other directors. They looked at me with curiosity, some with skepticism. "You're Charles Whitmore's son," the finance director said, his tone guarded. "Why are you here?" I met his gaze without blinking. "I'm here because I believe in what Lancaster Market is doing, and because I want to carry on my wife's dream, bringing fresh, affordable food to everyone, not just the wealthy." The room fell silent. Then Robert smiled, placing a hand on my shoulder. "That's the answer I wanted to hear," he said. "Let's get to work, Alex." I threw myself into the job like a man running from his own shadow. Each morning, I woke at 5 a.m., rereading Elena's notebook, searching for inspiration from her ideas. I proposed a new strategy, leveraging the logistics technology I'd worked on at Fresh Route to build a fresh in 24 hours distribution system. The idea was simple, but incredibly ambitious: deliver fresh food from farms to stores within a single day, at the lowest cost possible. If successful, it would position Lancaster Market to compete directly with Whitmore Retail, especially in major cities like Chicago, Miami, and Dallas. My father's untouchable strongholds. Robert backed me fully. "You can do this," he said during one late-night meeting. "Elena would be proud of you." Hearing her name made my heart clench, but I nodded, gripping my pen tightly. "I won't let you down, Dad," I said. And for the first time, I felt I wasn't just working for Elena, but for myself, to prove I could stand tall without the Whitmore name. The Eat Well Without Being Wealthy campaign launched a few months later. It was my idea, directly inspired by the notes in Elena's notebook. We weren't just selling food, we were telling a story. A story about ordinary families, about hardworking people, about single mothers, people who didn't need to spend hundreds of dollars for a quality meal. Our ads appeared on TV and social media, featuring smiling farmers, children holding fresh apples, and the simple, powerful message: Lancaster Market, good food for everyone. The campaign was a direct blow to Whitmore Retail. My father, with his philosophy of luxury goods for the elite, he couldn't fathom why middle-class customers, once the backbone of Whitmore's revenue, were suddenly turning away. Articles began to compare the two. Lancaster Market is redefining food retail, while Whitmore Retail is stuck in the past. I read those articles, feeling a mix of pride and a deep sense of vindication. But my greater purpose was clear. I was doing this because I believed Elena was right. Everyone deserves to eat well, not just the rich. One evening, as I worked late in the office, my phone rang. It was Nathaniel. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the answer button, but then I picked up. "Hey, big brother." His voice came through, cold and mocking. "Heard you're making waves at Lancaster Market." "Congrats, trader." "Nathaniel," I said, struggling to stay calm. "If you're just calling to mock me, hang up." "Oh no," he sneered. "I just wanted to remind you that you're digging your own grave. Dad won't let this slide. You think you can beat Whitmore Retail? You're wrong." I didn't respond. I just hung up. But Nathaniel's words, they echoed in my mind. I knew my father. He wasn't just a businessman. He was someone who never, ever forgave those who dared challenge him. And I, his eldest son, was now his greatest enemy. I sat in my small office at Lancaster Market's headquarters in Portland, the fluorescent light casting a dull glow over a desk cluttered with papers and charts. In front of me, a computer screen displayed the latest revenue data. Lancaster Market was growing, not in small steps, but in absolute leaps and bounds. The Eat Well Without Being Wealthy campaign had completely shaken up the food retail market. Our stores in Chicago, Miami, and Dallas, cities once considered impregnable fortresses of Whitmore retail, were now teeming with customers. Housewives, workers, even those who had once been fiercely loyal to my father's upscale brand, they were all flocking to Lancaster Market for fresh, affordable produce. But I didn't let myself get complacent. Not for a second. Every night before bed, I opened Elena's notebook, rereading her slanted handwriting. Fresh in 24 hours, every family deserves it. Those words were the fire that kept me going. The reason I woke up each morning and threw myself into work like a man racing against time. I wasn't doing this just to defeat my father though, I won't lie, a small part of me couldn't deny the deep satisfaction of seeing Whitmore retail falter. No, I was doing this for Elena. For Olivia. For Marcus. And to prove that a person could live true to their values, no matter the cost. Robert Lancaster called me into his office one autumn morning, as golden leaves began to fall across the Portland streets. He sat behind his desk, his silver hair gleaming, but his eyes as sharp as the day I first met him. "Alex," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "You've done what I never dared to dream. Lancaster Market is now a name on everyone's lips, but do you know what that means?" I looked at him, waiting. Robert smiled, but his smile carried a hint of real concern. "It means Charles Whitmore won't sit idly by. He's losing market share, losing shareholders, and most importantly, he's losing his reputation. A man like Charles doesn't accept defeat." I nodded unsurprised. I knew my father too well. He was the kind of man who would rather burn his empire to the ground than let it fall into someone else's hands. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady. "If he wants a fight, I'll give him one." Robert looked at me, his gaze softening. "You remind me of Elena," he said. "She had that same look, the look of someone who never gives up." I clenched my fists, feeling my heart tighten. Every mention of Elena brought her image vividly to mind, her radiant smile, her sparkling eyes. But I didn't let my emotions pull me under. I had a mission, and I would see it through. Whitmore retail began to crumble faster than I expected. Quarterly financial reports showed their revenue declining steadily, especially in cities where Lancaster Market had expanded. Their stores in Chicago and Dallas had to close, unable to compete with our prices and delivery speed. Middle-class customers, once captivated by Whitmore retail's glamour, realized they didn't need to spend hundreds of dollars on a bottle of olive oil or imported cheese. They wanted fresh, affordable food, and Lancaster Market was delivering it. I drew on my experience from Fresh Route to optimize Lancaster Market's supply chain. The "fresh in 24 hours" system wasn't just a slogan, it was a revolution. We partnered with local farms, using real-time tracking technology to ensure vegetables and fruits reached customers within a day of harvest. Suppliers, once hesitant to work with Lancaster Market for fear of retaliation from Whitmore retail, were now lining up to sign contracts with us. They appreciated my transparent, efficient approach, and more importantly, they saw the immense potential in a company experiencing such rapid growth. But not everyone was pleased. Nathaniel, my brother, began appearing in the media, desperately trying to salvage Whitmore retail's image. In an interview on CNBC, he sat upright in an expensive suit, speaking with polished, forced confidence. "Whitmore retail isn't just a supermarket chain. We're a symbol of sophistication and quality. Competitors like Lancaster Market may attract customers with low prices, but they'll never match our class." I turned off the TV, an uneasy feeling settling in my chest. Nathaniel could say whatever he wanted on television, but numbers don't lie. Whitmore retail was losing ground, and I knew they'd soon launch a counterattack. I just didn't expect it to come so quickly. One morning, as I reviewed revenue reports in my office, Robert walked in with a newspaper in hand. "You need to read this," he said, his voice tense. It was the Wall Street Journal, with a bold, infuriating headline. "Whitmore retail accuses Lancaster Market of copyright infringement in advertising campaign." The article quoted my father, Charles Whitmore, alleging that our "Eat Well Without Being Wealthy" campaign had copied an old Whitmore retail campaign. He announced plans to sue Lancaster Market, seeking millions in damages. I read the article, feeling my blood boil. This wasn't the first time my father had used lawsuits to crush competitors. He'd done it to Lancaster Market years ago, when Elena was a child, and now he was repeating history. But this time, I wasn't the 16-year-old boy sitting in on his boardroom meetings. I was Alex, Lancaster Market's Director of Strategic Development, and I wouldn't let him win so easily. I immediately convened our legal team. They have no evidence, I said, my voice firm, unwavering. Our campaign was built on Elena's ideas from her notebook. This is a dirty tactic, but we won't back down. The legal team agreed that Whitmore Retail's lawsuit lacked a strong foundation, but they warned that a legal battle could be lengthy and incredibly costly. Charles Whitmore doesn't need to win, one lawyer said. He just needs to distract us and damage our reputation. I nodded. But inside I knew this wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a declaration of war. My father was sending a message. He still controlled the game, and I couldn't escape his shadow. But he was wrong. I was no longer Alex Whitmore, the obedient eldest son. I was Alex, fighting for my wife's dream, and I wouldn't let him destroy it. The lawsuit dragged on for months, but it didn't deter us. While the lawyers handled the paperwork, I focused relentlessly on expanding Lancaster Market. We opened 10 new stores in major cities, from Atlanta to San Francisco. Each new store was a dagger to my father's pride. I imagined him sitting in his Manhattan office, reading those declining revenue reports, his face red with rage. But I didn't stop. I accelerated the Eat Well Without Being Wealthy campaign, launching new ads featuring real families sharing how Lancaster Market had changed the way they eat. One ad featured a single mother in Chicago saying, "I used to think fresh food was only for the rich. Lancaster Market proved me wrong." Audiences absolutely loved those stories. Our revenue soared, and suppliers began pulling away from Whitmore Retail. One of our biggest wins came when a major California farmers cooperative emailed me, saying they wanted to shift their entire contract to Lancaster Market because your way of doing business is transparent and respects us. It was a major victory, and it made me smile for the first time in months. The climax came at a national food retail conference in Las Vegas. I was invited to speak as Lancaster Market's representative. As I stepped onto the stage, my heart pounded, not from nerves, but because I knew my father was there, sitting somewhere in the audience. I didn't look at him, but I felt his gaze, cold, judgmental, just like the day he disowned me. I stood before hundreds of people, from CEOs to journalists, and began my speech. Lancaster Market isn't just about selling food, I said, my voice clear and strong. We're about bringing hope. We believe every American family, rich or poor, deserves to eat well. We're not building a brand for the elite. We're building a brand for everyone. The crowd applauded, but I wasn't speaking to them. I was speaking to Elena, to Olivia, to Marcus. I was speaking to those who believed in me, and to myself. When I finished, a Forbes reporter stood up and asked, "Mr. Whitmore, do you think Lancaster Market's success is a declaration of war against Whitmore Retail, your father's company?" I smiled. Not a triumphant smile, but the smile of a man who had finally found his path. "I'm not declaring war on anyone," I said. "I'm just doing what my wife, Elena Lancaster, dreamed of. Bringing good food to everyone. If that makes us a competitor to anyone, that's their problem, not mine." The crowd applauded again, louder this time. I stepped off the stage, feeling as though a colossal weight had been lifted. As I passed through the rows of seats, I caught a glimpse of my father sitting in the back, his face hard as stone. He didn't clap. He didn't look at me. But I knew he'd heard every single word. After the conference, articles began to appear. Alexander Whitmore, the game changer in food retail. They called me the Whitmore Rebel, the man who abandoned his family legacy to pursue a greater dream. Some even compared me to David slaying Goliath. I didn't like those comparisons. My father wasn't Goliath. He was just a man trapped by his own crushing pride. Whitmore Retail continued to weaken. Shareholders began questioning Nathaniel's competence as he struggled under the immense pressure. A Bloomberg article revealed that Nathaniel had spent millions on lavish, ineffective ad campaigns, while Lancaster Market won customers' trust with authentic, relatable ones. Whitmore Retail stores continued to close, and their stock plummeted on the exchange. One evening, as I worked late, Robert walked into my office with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "We need to celebrate," he said, his smile radiant. "Today, we officially surpassed Whitmore Retail in market share in 3 major states." I took the glass but didn't drink right away. I looked at Robert, the man who had become a father to me in a way Charles Whitmore never could. "Thank you, Dad," I said, "for believing in me." Robert raised his glass, clinking it against mine. "No, Alex," he said. "Thank you for keeping Elena's dream alive." A week after that celebration with Robert, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. No sender's name, just a single, curt line. "Meet me at the Waldorf Astoria, New York, Friday, 7 p.m., meeting room 3, CW. I didn't need a full signature to know who it was. Charles Whitmore, my father, was finally ready to face me. I stared at the email, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, torn between deleting it and responding. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to let him drown in the ruins of his crumbling empire. But another part, the part that still carried Whitmore blood, couldn't turn away. I needed to look him in the eye, to hear him speak, if only to confirm that I was right to cut ties with him. I replied, "I'll be there." New York greeted me with the biting chill of winter. Gusts of wind sweeping through streets aglow with Christmas lights. I stepped into the Waldorf Astoria, a place that had once been the playground of the Whitmore family during lavish galas. The lobby was as opulent as I remembered, with marble columns and warm golden light. But I was no longer the boy trailing behind my father in an oversized suit. I was Alex, a man who had chosen his own path. And I wasn't here to beg for forgiveness. I was here to confront him. Meeting room 3 was on an upper floor, with windows overlooking Manhattan's iconic skyline. When I pushed open the door, my father was already there, seated at the head of the table in a perfectly tailored black suit. He looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer, the lines around his eyes deeper. But his gaze was as sharp as ever, like a blade ready to cut down anyone who dared defy him. He didn't stand, didn't greet me, just gestured for me to sit. "Alex," he said, his voice low and deliberate, as if weighing every single word. "You've done well. I didn't expect you to go this far with that cheap supermarket chain." I sat across from him, keeping my expression neutral, my face a mask. "Lancaster Market isn't cheap," I said. "We bring good food to everyone. Something Whitmore Retail has never done." He gave a dry, mocking laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. "You still talk like a naive idealist, Alex. You think you're changing the world? You're just tearing down your family's legacy." I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the raw anger rising within me. "Legacy?" I asked, my voice low but sharp, cutting through the opulent silence. "What's your legacy, Dad? An empire built on arrogance? A family you were willing to abandon for the sake of your ego?" He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, his gaze like daggers. "You dare talk to me about family? You're the one who betrayed us. You chose that Lancaster girl, that low-class supermarket chain, over Whitmore Retail. Did you think I'd stand by and watch you destroy everything I've built?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "I didn't destroy anything. You did that yourself. You chose Nathaniel's birthday party over the funeral of my wife and children. You chose your reputation over your family. That was your choice, not mine." The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. My father fell silent, but I saw his hand tremble slightly on the table. For the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. Not regret, not true remorse, but uncertainty. He stood and walked to the window, staring down at the city below, a distant, lonely figure. "Whitmore Retail is struggling," he said, his voice flat, like he was just reading a financial report. "Shareholders are pulling out. Nathaniel, he's not strong enough to hold the company together. I need you, Alex. Come back. Help me save it. You're still my son." I almost laughed, a bitter, hollow sound, but the sound caught in my throat. "Save the company?" I asked, my voice laced with disbelief and scorn. "You think I'd come back after everything you've done? After you disowned me? After you didn't even show up to Elena's, Olivia's, or Marcus' funeral?" He turned back, his face hardening, his eyes cold and distant once more. "I was busy," he said, his voice like ice. "I have responsibilities to the company, to the shareholders. You wouldn't understand." I stood, stepping closer to him, just a few feet away. "Busy?" I said, my voice trembling now with pure, unadulterated anger. "Too busy to see your daughter-in-law and grandchildren one last time? Have you ever felt regret, Dad? Have you ever thought about how you chose Nathaniel's birthday party over standing by me when I lost everything?" He didn't answer. He just looked at me, his eyes clouded, not with tears, but with the emptiness of a man who had lost everything, yet still refused to admit it, even to himself. I shook my head, feeling the last invisible thread between us snap forever. "I was your son," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But you buried me along with them." I turned and walked out of the room, not looking back. As the door closed behind me, I felt a strange, profound sense of liberation. I was no longer Alex Whitmore, the eldest son of Charles Whitmore. I was Alex, fighting for Elena's dream, and I wouldn't let anyone, not even my father, stop me. In the weeks that followed, Whitmore Retail continued to collapse. News reports detailed how the company was selling off assets, frantically trying to pay debts. Nathaniel appeared on television, trying to maintain an air of confidence, but his eyes betrayed a sheer, absolute panic. Some major shareholders publicly criticized his competence, calling him an unworthy heir. I didn't feel joy reading those reports, but I didn't feel pity either. Nathaniel had chosen to stand with my father, and now he was facing the devastating consequences. Lancaster Market, meanwhile, kept expanding. We opened new stores in cities where Whitmore Retail had once dominated. The "Eat Well Without Being Wealthy" campaign became a phenomenon, studied in universities as a textbook example of value-driven marketing. Suppliers continued to abandon Whitmore Retail to sign contracts with us, and I received emails from farmers thanking Lancaster Market for giving them access to larger markets than ever before. One morning, Robert called me into his office. He slid a newspaper across the desk, its headline blaring. "Whitmore Retail files for bankruptcy protection." I read the article, feeling as though a monumental chapter of my life was finally closing. The company my father had spent his entire life building, the one he'd once hoped I'd inherit, was now just a name in grim headlines. "What do you think, Alex?" Robert asked, his eyes searching mine. I folded the paper and set it down. "I don't think anything," I said. "Whitmore Retail is no longer part of me. But Lancaster Market, that's my home." Robert nodded, a faint, proud smile crossing his face. "You've done what I never dared to dream," he said. "But you know, Alex, what I'm most proud of isn't the revenue or the market share. It's you. A man who rose from the ashes and kept fighting." I smiled, the first genuine smile in months, feeling a slight lightness in my heart. "Thank you, Dad," I said. "But this fight isn't over. We still have work to do." 2 years later, Lancaster Market had become the dominant name in food retail. We held over 60% of the market share across the United States, a figure even Robert, with all his optimism, hadn't dared to dream of. Our stores sprouted everywhere, from struggling neighborhoods in Detroit to bustling suburbs in Los Angeles. The "Eat Well Without Being Wealthy" campaign was no longer just a slogan. It had become a movement, a powerful reminder that good food shouldn't be a privilege reserved only for the wealthy. But no matter how sweet Lancaster Market's successes were, they couldn't completely fill the gaping void in my heart. I still saw Elena in every corner of my life. In the comforting smell of morning coffee, in Olivia's pink dress hanging in the closet, in Marcus's tiny shoes sitting alone in a corner. I had achieved so much, but the cost was too great. I wondered if Elena would truly be proud of me, or if she would want me to stop, to slow down and find some peace. One autumn afternoon, Robert called me into his office. He sat there, looking older, but with the same warm, wise smile I'd seen the day we met. "Alex," he said softly, "I've decided to retire." I looked at him, stunned. "Retire, Dad? Lancaster Market is at its peak. You can't." He raised a hand, cutting me off gently. "I've worked my whole life, Alex. I built Lancaster Market from a single store in Portland, and now it's bigger than I ever dreamed. But I'm tired. I want to spend the time I have left with Margaret, with our garden, and maybe to remember Elena in a way I haven't had time to do." I nodded, though inside I felt a sharp twinge of panic. Robert was the backbone of Lancaster Market, the one who had guided me through my darkest days. The thought of him leaving felt like losing an anchor. "And I want you to take over," he said, looking me straight in the eye. "You'll be the CEO of Lancaster Market." I opened my mouth to protest, but he shook his head. "Don't say no, Alex. You're the right person for this. You understand Elena's dream, our values. You've proven that. Not just to me, but to the world." I sat in silence, feeling a wave of overwhelming emotion swell in my chest. CEO of Lancaster Market. It was something Elena had once teased me about during those late nights at the kitchen table, dreaming wild, impossible dreams. One day you'll run the whole retail world, Alex. She'd laughed, playfully punching my shoulder. But don't let it make you arrogant, okay? I don't know if I'm worthy, I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. I've done everything for Elena, but I still feel like I haven't done enough. Robert stood, walked around the desk, and placed a hand on my shoulder. You've done more than enough, Alex. You've made her dream a reality. Now do this for yourself. Live a life you're proud of. I nodded, tears welling up, but I held them back fiercely. I'll try, Dad, I said. I promise. The day I officially became CEO, Lancaster Market held a small press conference at our Portland headquarters. Reporters from across the country flooded in, cameras flashing, and I stood at the podium, trying to maintain a calm, collected demeanor. I'm not here to build an empire, I said, my voice clear and resonating. I'm here to carry on a legacy. Elena Lancaster's legacy, who believed everyone deserves to eat well and live well. Lancaster Market won't stop, because we're not just selling food. We're bringing hope. The crowd applauded, and I looked down to see Robert and Margaret standing in the front row, smiling through their own tears. But in that moment, I could almost see Elena standing beside them, her brown eyes shining brightly. I blinked and she was gone. But I knew she was always there, in every decision I made, and every step I took. That autumn, I returned to the cemetery in Portland, where Elena, Olivia, and Marcus rested. The cemetery sat on a small hill, with rows of oak trees blazing red and gold under the setting sun. I walked along the path, carrying a bouquet of daisies, Elena's favorite flower. A gentle breeze carried the sweet, comforting scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby Lancaster Market store, one I had personally inaugurated just months earlier. I knelt before the 3 graves, placing the daisies on each one. I did it, Elena, I whispered, my voice soft enough for only the wind to hear. Lancaster Market is for everyone now, just like you always wanted. I kept my promise. I touched Olivia's headstone, then Marcus, feeling my heart constrict with that familiar, bittersweet ache. I wish you and the kids were here to see it. I sat there in silence, letting the memories flood back. Olivia's laughter as she chased her butterfly kite, the way Marcus gripped my finger when I held him. Elena's beautiful smile when she looked at me as if I were her entire world. Those memories were painful, yes, but they were also my strength. They reminded me that I had lived, had loved, and no matter how great the loss, I still had a reason to keep going. A soft breeze swept through, carrying the scent of bread, and with it, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I stood, looking out at the hill where the sun was setting, painting the sky a brilliant orange. Thank you, Elena, I whispered, for giving me a reason to live. In the years that followed, Lancaster Market continued to grow. But I was no longer just a man driven by a fight by vengeance. I learned to slow down, just as Robert had advised. I spent time with him and Margaret, helping them tend their small garden in Portland. I started a charitable foundation in Elena's name, providing free, fresh food to children in underserved neighborhoods. Every time I saw a child holding a fresh apple and smiling, I saw Olivia. I saw Marcus. And I knew I was doing the right thing. As for the Whitmores, I cut off all contact. I heard my father had left New York, moving to a small house in the suburbs after Whitmore Retail's bankruptcy. Nathaniel tried to launch a new company, but it failed, just like my father's empire. My mother sent letters occasionally, but I didn't respond. Not because I couldn't forgive, but because I had found a new family. The Lancasters. The people who believed in me, and the family of dreams I was living. My story ends here, but my life, it absolutely doesn't. Each day I wake up, carrying Elena, Olivia, and Marcus in my heart. I walk into the office, watching Lancaster Market's employees work with such passion, and I know I found my purpose. I'm no longer Alex Whitmore, the eldest son of an empire. I'm Alex, a man who lost everything but found,